Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. When this whole controversy around Tulsi Gabbard started picking up steam, a lot of people immediately focused on the surface level drama. Was there a sensitive intercepted call? Yes. Was there a whistleblower complaint? Yes. Did it allegedly involve someone close to President Trump and possibly discussions connected to Iran? According to reports, yes. And then the accusation that she didn't properly notify Congress and instead routed the matter through the White House. That's the headline version. But honestly, I don't think the real story is about one phone call. I don't even think it's really about Tulsi Gabbard as an individual. What makes this interesting and politically significant is the tension underneath it. This is one of those moments where institutional rules collide with political loyalty. And when that happens in today's America, things get messy very fast. On paper, the structure is straightforward. The intelligence community gathers information. The executive branch handles national security. Congress oversees the intelligence community to make sure power isn't abused. That's the constitutional balance. Executive authority on one side, legislative oversight on the other. But in reality, especially in a hyper-polarized environment, that balance doesn't operate in a vacuum. Every decision sits inside a political context. And when sensitive intelligence touches someone close to a president, especially a president as politically polarizing as Donald Trump, suddenly what might have been a routine reporting decision becomes explosive. So the core question isn't just, did she break the rules? It's deeper than that. It's about which loyalty comes first when those loyalties pull in different directions. If you're director of national intelligence and you receive information that could politically impact the president's inner circle, what do you prioritize? Do you immediately send it to congressional committees, knowing it could turn into a partisan firestorm within hours? Or do you first move it through executive channels to assess risk and manage the fallout internally? Now, I'm not saying one answer is correct and the other is wrong. I'm saying that in today's political climate, either choice carries consequences. Critics argue that bypassing Congress undermines oversight. And oversight is critical. The entire post-Watergate intelligence reform structure was built on the idea that secret agencies must answer to elected representatives. That's not optional. That's foundational. But supporters might argue that the executive branch has primary responsibility over national security operations, and that not every piece of intelligence automatically requires immediate congressional notification. There are gray areas, there are legal interpretations, there are questions about materiality, relevance, classification layers. These things are rarely black and white. What complicates this even more is Tulsi Gabbard's political trajectory. She didn't arrive in this role as a lifelong Republican insider. She was a Democratic congresswoman. She ran in the Democratic presidential primary. She later broke with her party's establishment. Eventually, she aligned herself more closely with Trump's political orbit. That kind of evolution changes incentives. When your current political viability depends heavily on one side of the aisle, loyalty isn't abstract, it's strategic. If she believed that sending this intelligence straight to Congress would immediately weaponize it against the administration, she may have calculated that executive containment was the safer path. Politically safer, at least. Does that mean she knowingly accepted legal risk? Maybe, or maybe she genuinely believed she was operating within her authority. That's another important point. A lot of controversies in Washington aren't about blatant lawbreaking. They're about interpretation. Legal language governing intelligence notification is technical. Some requirements are mandatory and immediate. Others depend on thresholds and context, without a formal inspector general finding. Everything right now lives in the realm of allegation and counterinterpretation. Now let's talk about Trump's side of this, because there's another layer here. Some commentators have suggested that even if her actions were meant to protect him politically, that doesn't automatically mean he fully trusts her. That sounds paradoxical. But in Washington, usefulness and trust are two different currencies. Presidents often value people for their political function. If someone is effective at defending the administration publicly, countering critics or attacking opponents that creates utility. But strategic trust, especially in matters of foreign policy or national security, can be a separate calculation. There have been suggestions that she hasn't always been central to certain high-level foreign policy decisions. But we have to be careful not to overinterpret that. The Director of National Intelligence coordinates intelligence. She's not the operational commander of military actions. Being outside certain tactical decisions doesn't automatically signal distrust. Sometimes it's just how institutional lines are drawn. Still, in political terms, controversy changes cost-benefit math. If an official becomes more politically expensive than politically valuable, that's when their position weakens. That's not unique to this administration. That's structural in American politics. What fascinates me about this whole episode is how quickly institutional debates become moral narratives. One side frames it as cover-up or abuse of power. The other frames it as protecting executive authority or shielding national security. And somewhere in the middle is a procedural dispute about notification timing. But because we are living in an era of extreme polarization, procedural disputes don't stay procedural. They become symbolic. They become existential. And that brings us to the broader issue. Institutional boundaries are increasingly blurry. The intelligence community was designed to operate in secrecy, but under oversight. The presidency was designed to exercise strong foreign policy authority, but within constitutional limits. Congress was designed to check the executive, but not to micromanage it. In theory, those lines are clear. In practice, when politics intensifies, those lines get stretched. Every administration pushes executive authority to some degree. Every opposition party pushes oversight aggressively when it doesn't control the White House. That dynamic isn't new. What's new is the speed and intensity with which conflicts escalate into full-blown trust crises. So where does this go from here? If congressional committees decide to formally escalate hearings, subpoenas, inspector general findings, then the legal and procedural questions will get sharper. If not, the story may gradually fade into the background noise of Washington controversies. Media cycles move fast, political attention shifts, but regardless of how this specific case resolves, it reflects a deeper trend. We are in a period where loyalty to political figures often competes with loyalty to institutional norms. And when those two loyalties collide, individuals inside the system are forced to choose. Some choose strict procedural compliance, even if it harms their political allies. Others choose political protection, even if it invites procedural scrutiny. And from the outside, it's tempting to frame those choices as purely good or purely bad. But the reality is more complicated. In a highly polarized environment, almost every institutional action is interpreted through a partisan lens. Reporting intelligence becomes exposing corruption on one side and weaponizing oversight on the other. Executive discretion becomes strong leadership to some and dangerous overreach to others. That's why I think the most important takeaway here isn't whether Tulsi Gabbard was right or wrong. It's that the structural tension between executive power and congressional oversight is intensifying. The system still functions. Whistleblowers can file complaints, media can report, Congress can question, but the trust that once underpinned those mechanisms is thinner. And when trust erodes, every gray area decision becomes a flashpoint. So instead of asking only whether she violated a rule, maybe the more revealing question is this. In today's America, how clearly defined are the boundaries between protecting a president and protecting the institution? Because the more polarized we become, the harder it is to separate those two things. And that, more than any single controversy, is the real story. Thanks for watching.